resigned as our,
I thought maybe he was gonna bring it.
Time.
For our last meeting.
yeah.
I hope we didn't
We were all talking
offend her.
about how she needs so much more help, and she commented about how she's doing the work of 4 people
And then she leaves and goes.
compared to Olathe, and then that's where she went.
How many kids she got? Not only do we not have more, but Cindy, that's hard. Runs the farm. Dilapidated housing. Yeah.
You think he doesn't know? No, I said it was you and I. Yeah, because we broke the straw, we're the straw that broke the camel.
Big shoes to fill.
I deal with your problem.
Yeah, no, I was always impressed with how, she was my realtor
Yeah.
15 years ago when I bought the house I'm in. She was doing real estate then. She's a really fine cellist too, so the symphony loses a good cello.
And do we need to have a motion to continue that? Okay. We'll go ahead and call the January 18th, 2011 meeting of the Salina Planning Commission to order. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved?
And a second? Is there a motion to approve the summary minutes of the January 4th, 2011 meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye to both.
Aye.
Opposed? None being heard, motion carries. Item number 2, public hearing items. Dean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. These two items were both public hearing items at which notice was provided, and to allow the public that was continuing to follow these cases, since we did not table this to a time certain, and we wanted to give the applicant a chance to submit the additional information. We took it to the next meeting, but were informed by Mr. Deschamps, who represents Dolan Realty, that the maps, the propagation maps that we had requested were not available. Mr. Hers was able to contact and visit with Mr. Pace at some length, and I'll let you get an update from him on item 2 there, which is the item of interest to Mr. Pace, the gist of their conversation.
More or less, Mr. Pace is concerned about the setback of the tower, with it being a 100-foot tower and only set back 24 feet from his north property line and 50-some feet from his west property line. So he'd like to see that setback at least 100 feet, or the height of the tower. His other concern, which was a primary concern, is he is concerned about the shared access easement. And do we have the other pointer? Yeah, John's hand there is showing where there's the access to the storage property actually comes off of Euclid. There's an access easement that runs parallel to 9th Street, and that's how Verizon would get access to the property, is through that access easement. And Mr. Pace is concerned about having other people using that access easement, even though that's what the access easement is for. But he just wanted to make sure that people understood his concern of that, so that's the update that he had, and just want to make sure that everybody understood that he didn't want people using the public access easement, even though I shared with him that that's the purpose of the easement, is for that property of access, since it doesn't have access off of 9th Street.
Isn't that property gated with one of those electronic controls? Don't you have to have a keypad or something to get in there?
I haven't been out there, so I don't know.
Right up here,
Yeah.
there is for the customers of the mini storage.
So the only
Correct.
people that would go down that access road would be people that either Verizon customers or the people that needed to get into the mini storage.
Right. The use of it by Verizon would obviously be the crews that might go in there and install a tower, and then any ongoing maintenance. So it's not going to be frequent, but this is that is an ongoing point of contention for Mr. Pace about the property in general. But I think we could summarize by saying that the setback relief that the applicants are requesting or proposing is not supported by the property owner most affected. I think you've got some photo, well, it shows up on the aerial photo, and we are well aware that Mr. Pace is not a very good custodian of his property there, but I think some other commissioners noted that this tower could have an extended life. It could outlive Mr. Pace's ownership and use of that property, and the way that this would be addressed from a building code standpoint or buildings standpoint, is Mr. Kennedy is well experienced with the former Alco Center, now Genesis Health Club, is the way that we would address that through a building code would be for the abutting owner to grant a no-build easement to the tower builder, basically saying we agree not to place any buildings within that area to maintain. So in other words, if you could go back to the aerial, John, if this tower is set back 24 feet from here, then you could have what's essentially a no-build zone 76 feet out onto Mr. Pace's property, but that would be a burden that would be put on the people wanting to build a tower to get Mr. Pace to agree. And what that would mean is that not only Mr. Pace, but his successors would agree not to place a building of any kind there. And so the response back got and said, well, if there was ice buildup here and it came down, the only thing that it would damage would be some inoperable vehicles, and that is correct today. But we're supposed to be planners and look to this to the long term. So Mr. Deschamps not here to defend their location, but I think it's fair to say that there probably are some locations along this corridor where you could pick a site that had 100 feet in all directions for a buffer. So I can understand that they had a willing lease partner here, but that doesn't necessarily make it an ideal site in terms of its proximity to other properties or buildings. And I don't have it in front of me, but I did see a news item in that talked about within the last week and a half it was a television tower, but incredible amounts of ice that built up on it and then fell or blew off and caused a vast amount of damage.
Yeah, that was on TV. It was pretty graphic. I didn't expect, I figured little small pieces of ice. These are big chunks.
And they look small when you're on the ground, but when they reach the ground, they're quite large and quite heavy. And so again, it's not strictly that you've got a 100-foot tower and it's just going to fall over like that, but it's also having a clear zone around it so that visually and potential impact wise, that the only property you're impacting is the one that has the tower on it and not the neighbors. So that's why we do the notice requirement. That's why we do the public hearing, is so people have a chance to comment on that. Mr. Pace happens to be in Colorado, so it's not easy to get in touch with him or have him come here and speak for himself. But we're looking at it from the standpoint that basically this tower location is imposing somewhat of a restriction, utilizing the empty space on Mr. Pace's property instead of having enough space of their own. And we haven't had that much of an issue to date because most of our tower locations are on larger sites than that. And
With his protesting this, does that that doesn't put us into some different voting.
No vote
category.
requirement or anything,
Right,
that it's still, again, all you could do in this case is you could recommend yea or nay on the setback reductions. The way the ordinance is set up, only the governing body can actually grant relief from that. And that, there has not been a case like that to date. And we're, before our, if this comes back with the additional maps and things, before we go into that, we'll give you an actual inventory. But just from the notes that I had, there is a AT&T tower that's on Enterprise Drive, south of Schilling Road, that was in the county that the city inherited on annexation. There is a tower referred to in your background report, which was the first cellular tower in Salina on Graves Boulevard. There is the tower at the East Crawford Recreation Area that's 225 feet tall, a 100-foot tall tower on Franklin to the is just east of Broadway Boulevard. There's a 200-foot tower on Front Street just north of North Street, and there are two new towers of 100 feet at Central and South. So there are 7 towers within the city limits, and 3 of those are in the 100-foot range. The other ones are taller.
Why, is there any reason for us to hear this again until, if they don't
No.
have the setback? It says in your recommendations about continuing to February 1, but it seems to me that we don't have the information we need. There's no approval for the setback, so are we
Well,
done with it?
the reason for continuing it to February 1 is just to give them an opportunity to finish their maps of the, even if this site, this particular site doesn't work and they come up with a different site in this vicinity, those maps will still be relevant. So I still think that continuing these 2 applications to February 1st to allow Mr. Deschamps to get back here and make his case would be the appropriate action. And then either before or after making that motion, we'd be happy to address any questions that you might have resulting from the background report that we put in there about how cell phones and towers work, and see if there's any questions there. But to be fair to him, even if the ultimate answer is that 9th Street doesn't work, then we would want to do that where Mr. Deschamps is present and has an opportunity to have his maps showing their tower coverage in Salina.
Well, I'm still a little bit confused. It seems like administratively you could collect the materials that are necessary to support an application in its entirety, and I don't know that we would need to hear it again if our concern is about the setback, and until they receive a release from the property owner for the setback, I would think we would be in a position to just say no again. Am I wrong? I mean,
Well-
what are we going to hear new? In other words, if Mr. Deschamps doesn't approve the setback variance, what are we going to hear that's different?
What I told Mr. Deschamps was that because he didn't get us the maps that were requested, and because there was not the item was tabled until those maps were provided, because we didn't have a date certain on that I had to put it back on the agenda with the understanding that he would not be able to or have to be here. So it would not be appropriate to take any vote other than postponement until he can be here and be present, because he is the applicant.
And essentially, he's paid for an application, and we need
Right.
to see it through.
And even if the ultimate answer is that the North 9th Street site is denied, he deserves to be here to
Understand.
have that. So
Thank you.
our recommendation would be to have items 2 and 3 continue to February 1st so he can get us those maps.
I'd make that, are you ready for a motion?
I am ready for motion.
I'd make that motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded to move application SP 10-1 and SP 10-2 to the February meeting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None being heard, motion carries.
Just one other question. Mr. Hers, you didn't talk to or ask Mr. Pace if he was interested in the tower on his property?
No, I did not.
Okay.
We figure that's up to Mr. Duchesne.
Right.
We don't have a lot of moving pictures or fancy graphics or a cartoon illustration to show you graphically how the cell tower technology works, but the basic gist of it is that even with all the changes in technology, it is a line of sight technology, meaning that you do need to have your antennas in tall places where how the signal is being passed from one cell to another is not obstructed by buildings or tall trees or grain elevators or things like that. So it is a line of sight technology, meaning that the signal can be obstructed or interrupted. And so that is the purpose for trying to get the antennas up off the ground. And again, it's up to the applicants to show that there's no buildings or other structures available, but as we've indicated, water towers are not workable alternatives, and we do have some antennas on buildings like the United Building, Marymount College Administration Building, the Science Hall at Kansas Wesleyan, and the latest was a combination tower light standard at Salina Stadium. So that the other change in the technology was going from analog to digital or to the PCS technology. It means having smaller cell sites, and what that does is your call is passed on from one cell to another, and as traffic increases, the cells have to be smaller because there's only so many frequencies to go around. And so if there are smaller cells, then the same frequency can be used in different cells, so they won't conflict with each other. So as the technology has changed, when it was first looked at, you had a whole bunch of tall towers greatly spaced apart, and almost none of them were in cities. Almost all of them were in rural areas. And when it first started out, most of the coverage in Salina was covered from towers in the rural areas surrounding. And it's two things have happened. The towers have gotten closer together, and then the towers have gotten shorter from 250 to 200 to now in the range of 100 to 120 feet. But that is the change in technology, that the cells or grids are becoming smaller just because each grid or cell is carrying so much more traffic than it was previously, and because they can there's only so many frequencies to go around. By having smaller cells, then they can use the same frequency in a next door cell or two cells over without conflicting, without overloading their individual cells, and which would result in drop calls or lack of service. So that is why the trend we see is probably going to be for, and doesn't necessarily have to be more towers, but it's more antenna sites, probably lower to the ground, but more closely spaced than maybe what was originally anticipated. But I guess another way to to look at it is basically your cell tower is or your cell phone is like a radio, and it's like a glorified walkie-talkie that only has so much range to it, but it gets passed on from cell to cell to cell to keep that in place. And so the towers are simply a place to hold the antennas, and the antennas do all the work as far as receiving and transmitting the signals. But I guess one way would be to look at it as like a walkie-talkie, and if you get too far away on your walkie-talkie, you're going to lose your connection because there's nothing to pick up that signal and pass it on. But it is a combination of the technology plus the fact that with the internet access and texting and all the different applications on a phone all transmitting data at the same time, it is both a capacity and a ability to transmit issue for those companies. So I do think it's a trend, but the goal is still to try as much as possible not to have a proliferation of towers. And so the bar, we're trying to set the bar appropriately high enough for them to make a case. The other thing I wanted to point out, which is a card that sometimes gets played, is that there is a federal law, the Federal Telecommunications Act, and it says that local zoning ordinances may not unreasonably discriminate among providers of functionally equivalent services. That basically means that you can't be nice to Sprint and not nice to AT&T because you don't like their service or whatever else. You need to treat them all with the same criteria. Zoning ordinances may not prohibit or have the effect of prohibiting the provision of wireless services. If we had an ordinance that basically made it impossible to build a tower of any kind anywhere in the city, that probably wouldn't hold up. And then it says you can't regulate wireless service facilities based on the environmental effects of radio frequency emissions, which was what was discussed at your last meeting. In other words, the federal law from a safety standpoint pretty much preempts that and says you can't deny somebody the ability to have an antenna on a tower because neighbors are concerned about radio frequency emissions from that tower. Basically because that subject has been studied by numerous federal agencies and found not to have any health impacts.
I'm still kind of intrigued and thinking about Commissioner Kennedy's suggestion that the cell towers get built in the floodplain or the floodway. It seems to me that puts them out of the public domain more, and certainly with the propagation of services and an increase in population, cell phone towers are going to get more prevalent, and it seems if they were out in that area, it would also give landowners that didn't have any other use for that specific land, they might have the ability to locate a tower out there.
Yeah, there are, I said, a few more things to do with the flood way, but we have Graves Boulevard is in the floodplain, and the South High Tower is in the floodplain, and that really didn't have much of an impact on that being a site or how they anchored it or anything. It only had to do with how much you elevate your electrical equipment to make sure it's reasonably safe from flooding. So, and I'm not suggesting that that's the appropriate place, but as far as I know, they did not approach the city about Thomas Park. which is north of the levee there in the same general area, but probably has a lot more open space to it and buffers, or any of the property farther north on 9th Street, which is pretty much open because of the floodway situation. So, I said on page 4 of your report, these are from the federal government handout on the Telecommunications Act, but it says local governments must act on applications to place, construct, or modify facilities within a reasonable period of time. We have done that. Local government decisions denying personal wireless service facility applications shall be in writing and supported by substantial evidence contained in a written record. We do that with regularity on all of our cases, so that's not anything special. That just means that you have to make a motion and that you have to have reasons in your motion, and the written record is our minutes of the meeting. And it gives them the right, if they're adversely affected by a local decision, to commence an action in federal or state court. So, again, the local government authority is not preempted by the Telecommunications Act. It just provides the outlines or ground rules for what can be regulated locally, and we have that authority through our zoning ordinance as long as we behave fairly and reasonably. And I think we aim to do that in all of our cases, whether it's a daycare or a cell tower. So that's the information we have. If there's anything of a graphical nature, again, except for this case, I've seen these in all the previous cases. What they do is they have their radio frequency engineer map out all the towers, and they provide with that a colored ring that goes with that tower and says, this tower provides service within this area. The next tower to pass a signal on to is here, and then that provides the justification for everybody to see we have a gap here. So some of the thing we talked about, and I didn't go into all that detail, but we actually had a what is referred to as a COW, a cell tower on wheels, at the Roselawn Cemetery at the Crawford and Marymount intersection there, and that was used by the Sprint PCS to make their case for how they could improve coverage in that area. So the impetus for our latest changes and what happened with the tower out at East Crawford was they came in and said, basically, we can't serve all of our customers in Salina east of the river. We need something in that general area. And the Planning Commission, City Commission said, well, they didn't like the cemetery site very well, but the East Crawford recreation area was preferred, and then that tower was built at 225 feet with 5 co-locates on it, with the idea that that should accommodate anybody and everybody who wanted to provide service out in that area. So that is part of the key, is to make sure that if somebody builds a tower, that there are other users who can locate on it, so you don't have to have Sprint and AT&T and others each have their own tower. They've got to cooperate. So we've tried to do that locally as well. So,
Dean, this document, the application for wireless communication facility, is that a new?
well, I wanted to share that with you because and part of this was the busyness of Mr. Duchamp and how many different projects he was trying to juggle in different locations and times. But as I reviewed the application and reviewed the material we got, We reviewed that and decided we need to beef up our application a little bit, both for staff and for the commissioners. The application that is filled out and is in your packet today is just a one-page thing and doesn't really provide much information and doesn't tell the applicant much about what is expected. So we're proposing to replace that one-page application with this, and I think page 3 is the most important page that indicates, I mean, the thing that we've added here is a place for the property owner, a place for the applicant, a place for who the primary contact person is, and then a listing on page 3 of all the things that need to be provided to have a complete application. Those things are in our ordinance, and I think Mr. Duchamp acknowledged that they were in there and that he missed them. But I think beefing up this application and having that on there, I think will help get more complete applications and justifications, so we don't get to this point like we are here of having the different things come in pieces instead of comprehensively. So page 3 is basically a checklist for the applicant, and if they don't have those things, then they don't have a complete application. So
Great.
we haven't had this problem before, but this was a case where a lot of the information on these two came in pieces, and we kind of pieced it together. And I think switching to this application with the information on the cover, and it basically says this is the minimum required, and basically if you don't have it, you don't have a complete application. And it also indicates clearly that it must bear the signature of the property owner, so we don't have to guess about whether they've got standing and have everything worked out with that owner. So that is a follow-up to that we think this substituting for the one-page thing that we have will help applicants, it will help staff, and it will help the commission see that we've got a complete submittal.
Good, looks good. It should streamline things, I hope.
Is there anything that, from a graphical standpoint, or anything that we can help, again, provide about how cell technology works beyond what the background report had in it to help understand why these providers are coming forward with ideas for more towers?
Just a quick question. If they're taller, can they be spaced farther apart? Is there a reason other than height that they've went to more popular spacing? I mean, I don't. They used to be 200 feet. In other words, the reason for the question is we've got a few elevators sitting downtown that seem to have no purpose right now. Could they be put on top of those and be higher and have to have fewer of them?
Yeah, and that's the way our ordinance is set up. It's to the burden is on the applicant to show that there's not an and that's where the maps come in. That if the maps show that the area that would be served by an antenna on the grain elevators is already served because we have an antenna on the United building, then that's part of their case for why they have to put it somewhere else. So the first question that we ask is, can you find an existing structure or building to hang it on? And that's the first thing that we direct. The other thing is that I don't know if it's double, but it is much more costly to build a 200-foot tower than a 100-foot tower. So they don't, it's not a thing that they do lightly, because it's not inexpensive to build towers. But sometimes what happens is Verizon or other things will contract out with different companies to go find them sites. And so we've had experience of sometimes 3 parties coming into our office saying, I work for Verizon and I'm here in Salina trying to find a site for a new tower. And then 2 days later, somebody else comes in and says, I work for Verizon and I'm trying to find a site for them for a new tower. And then there's another party that comes in. So they kind of just put it out there and say, all right, the first one that can find us a place wins. And so sometimes there's not an exhaustive, but, you know, putting an antenna on top of the Marymount Administration Building where nobody can see it on the roof is preferable to building a tower on the Salina Country Club. So that's what we'll aim for first, and then it's up to them to bring in the maps and the supporting data that say, this is the area we need to cover, there's no other place for us to hang an antenna, we need to do a tower, and then it's up to us to find the least obtrusive location that has the best setbacks. And I'm not, as a staff, I don't know that they've absolutely exhausted every location along North 9th where they might have better buffers than this one. So we'll search around and see if we can find a graphic that depicts that, but that's our best effort, is explaining how cell technology works.
Any further questions of staff? Okay, let's move on to item number 4, presentation of the 2010 annual report. Dean?
Yeah, this is our annual summary that's provided on your behalf to the City Commission, and try to do our best to summarize what we did in 2010, what we didn't do and remains as goals, give us and you a chance to review our attendance records to see if they square with your recollection. We also have the exhibit there that has everybody's term expiration dates in it, and so I think even though from a case, actual development case applications were down in 2010 compared to previous years, if you look at some of the things that were accomplishments or things that went on, the floodplain remapping and its implications for the community were huge, and the 2 community meetings that were held at the Bicentennial Center had very large attendance and interested attendance. And what we had was a series of about, I don't know, it might have been as many as a dozen tables that we had manned with people with laptops that were doing lookups for individual property owners to see where they were on the new maps in relationship to the old maps, whether their letters of map amendment were accounted for. And so what occurred was we had those meetings, gathered public input and protests. We submitted a formal appeal to FEMA challenging the new maps. At the same time, we did what we've learned from our experiences planners, that if we have a hearing on an item scheduled for the Planning Commission and we as a staff fail to give proper notice, then we basically have to start over, because any action you take is null and void for inadequate notice. And so we told FEMA that we thought that the notice that they published and gave the community on map changes was deficient, and they agreed, since all the locations they described on their notice were outside the city of Salina. So they said, we're going to give you a new appeal period, which started in October, and tomorrow we're going to send in our second appeal, and we're alleging as part of that appeal that the notice that they provided the community was still deficient because the areas, we gave them a lot of the terminology, but we have an area called critical drainage area number 2, which is an area bounded by Cloud, Crawford, Ohio, and the levee. And they described changes to the maps inside that area on streets that are nowhere near critical drainage area number 2. So if you were a resident and you read that and saw that base flood elevations on Prescott were changing, and you lived on Martin, that probably isn't going to tell you anything that you should be aware of. So we're filing our second appeal tomorrow, and we'll see what happens then. But the floodplain mapping was a major undertaking. We had a whole series of meetings with you discussing things like gateways and conservation areas and complete streets. And we had those both before and after your recommendation of adoption in March. So we had a updated comprehensive plan adopted. We had erosion and sediment control ordinances that came back to you in April that were adopted. We discussed comprehensive plan implementation. We had a number of meetings on front yard storage buildings. We talked about neighborhood blight and reviewed a possible amendment or supplement to the city code for property maintenance, and which you were strongly in favor of moving in that direction. And then from a development side, we actually finalized the plat for Premier Edition and Magnolia Commons, and you see the Menards construction underway. The only major subdivision we had was Stone Lake, but at 150 acres and 160 lots, that was a very major review. And then we had a new hotel in front of Lowe's, which has not materialized yet. Our case at Marymount and Crawford, an Ashby House Child Care Center, and the Children's Center campus at Oakdale and Ash. That were some of the major projects that were reviewed. And so the one thing we added, which we'd ask you to review, is, and I think I changed the terminology because it probably didn't, I think I changed it to recommendations to the City Commission as opposed to you having goals for our City Commission. But the 3 items there, I hope I summarized correctly, were to appoint an ad hoc committee to recommend standardized aesthetic standards and elements for gateways into the city, adopt a new property maintenance code, and adopt zoning changes you recommended regarding location permits for storage sheds on residential corner lots. And so that's kind of a summary of what was and what we'd like to see happen upcoming, and I'd be open to any questions or comments you have on that, or if you question your attendance percentage, I'll let you take that up with Alyssa.
My only comment on the goals for the city commission, with the property maintenance code, I thought I remembered, and maybe it's because it's what I wanted, that
The strongly encouraged part?
well, yes, but the issue of personnel that it was going to take
Okay.
in order to bring ourselves up to the point where we're so behind right now that, and getting further behind, obviously, with fewer personnel, that I thought we were going to try to encourage the city commission at budget time to consider different ways of funding positions to at least bring that to a point where.
I think that was reflected in the motion in the minutes, but
Okay.
As far as that language, if we or if we enhance that by including the language about appropriate levels of
Right.
staffing,
Right.
then would that better reflect
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Since you don't have a budget and they do, that would be
Right.
appropriate.
Any questions of staff regarding the 2010 annual report? We need to make a motion to accept this. Is that correct, Dean?
Yeah, if you would, like I said, if you agree with all the attendance and those things, and there's no glaring, you misspelled my name, or I was there 100% of the meetings, and that type of thing, then let us know. But otherwise, I've made a note to supplement the language on the property maintenance code, and absent anything else, then a motion to submit this report to the city commission on your behalf would be appropriate.
I'd entertain a motion.
I make a motion, we submit the report to the city commission with the changes noted.
Second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded to adopt the 2010 annual report with the change on the goals for the city commission to include staffing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None being heard, motion carries. Other matters?
We have included in your packet the draft, not draft because it's adopted, language in the new local fireworks ordinance. And I will direct your attention to, on page 2 of that ordinance, section 1457.6. We have already been getting inquiries about that. I took one just before I came down this afternoon. Basically what it says is that within the city limits, you may set up a consumer fireworks stand starting on June 27th and ending on July 4th, subject to the following requirements. You must obtain a temporary use permit, which is already addressed in the concept of temporary use permits already adopted in the temporary use regulations. You have to have appropriate zoning, a site plan, and a parking review of that location. It can only be located within a tent. So in other words, I can't take a vacant commercial building and make a fireworks shop out of it. And I cannot, I've already had the question, I've got this 8-foot by 40-foot trailer that I'd like to bring into town and sell fireworks out of, and that answer is no. The only provision that's made for is to set up a tent or canopy, and a tent or canopy that has some fire resistive rating, and then the fire department also has some anchoring requirements to avoid collapse. And then that size of that cannot exceed 2,400 square feet. You're allowed to have a single sign up to 32 square feet for that temporary facility. And then there is a provision that you may put up which is not likely to be a building, it's more likely to be a pod or some storage unit up to 120 square feet. That may be secured or padlocked. In other words, tents aren't real secure, but if you want to take your inventory and put it in a secure pod overnight, or your cash register or whatever that is, you can have that on site as well. The way that the temporary use permit provisions work, our other open air markets, you have to have C3 or higher zoning. So if I want to set up in a church parking lot, that's not going to work, or a school parking lot. So it's going to have to be a commercial location just similar to what we have with our garden or produce stands or flea markets or other tool tent sales, things of that nature. What we would envision needing to do or clarify is in the attached ordinance, we list in the temporary use ordinance, we list specific uses and regulations. We list Christmas tree sales, contractors' offices, real estate project sales offices, those types of things. We think it would be appropriate to add fireworks stands to that and any special provisions that might be needing to apply to that. So what we'd be asking for today is authorization for you to sponsor a text amendment to add a similar section to the Chapter 42 temporary use to spell out some of the ground rules for reviewing the fireworks stands. And these would not come to you. They would be done administratively by staff, but we want that section to be as clear as can be. And then based on that, we will develop a brochure that we'll make available to the applicants so we can get appropriate locations.
Is there a motion to create a text amendment to instruct the staff to add fireworks stands to temporary uses?
So moved.
And a second?
Second?
Moved and seconded to have the staff add fireworks stand to the list of temporary uses. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? None being heard, motion carries.
Since the ordinance is already passed, you don't get to vote on whether it's a good idea or not. But my only concern is that we'll do all this and
Yeah.
that the city commission will reverse itself. But that's happened before. But it was a 3-2 vote to approve it, and we'll move forward with that direction. But either a property owner or planning commission or city commission has to initiate a zoning text change, so you get to be nominated to initiate that. So you will have an opportunity to review that before anything happens, and I think that's likely to happen on February the 15th. And on the 1st, we'll have Mr. Deschamps back here for whatever the appropriate action is on his requests, and then we have application filed by the group that wishes to do redevelopment at the Hawthorne School site, and that is scheduled for February 1st as well. In the meantime, we think on the 24th, next Monday, will be the City Commission consideration of the appeal on the school. And there is a new group that's formed called the North Side Project, and they have a planner that works for them now on a volunteer basis, and I met with him today, and we'll be sharing information. But that group is headed up by Mike Weiss of Weiss Fire, and they're just looking at things that they can do to improve the living and investment environment in North Salina, and they are divided amongst themselves as far as the future of the Hawthorne School building and site, so they don't have an official position on that, but we do have an appeal of the demolition decision that has to be heard by the City Commission, and if that is upheld, then the next step is to have their site plan reviewed by you to make sure it has all the elements that the community wants to see.
Who is
So.
the volunteer planner?
His name's John Blanchard. He says he's a landscape architect graduate from Kansas State. And I think he knows Mr. Weiss, and just came out here at his urging to help the group get organized and get some thoughts together. So he's doing some work for them on a volunteer basis, and we're going to help him any way we can.
The corner of Pacific and 9th that the Weisses took over
Mm-hmm.
looks nice.
Yeah, so I think it's appropriate that somebody who's made investments in that area and has stayed there to be involved in that. And there hasn't been a real organization to liaison with and work with on their issues. But I think that will help with enforcement. I think it will help with zoning. Like I said, there were some comments that when we did our hearing notices on Hawthorne School, that we hadn't sent notice to their organization and said, to be honest, we didn't know you existed or who your officers were. But now we do, and we've had some interaction, and we'll try to communicate with them on issues that affect the north part of the community. So hopefully they'll be represented on the 1st as well and have some input on the plan. But I think that's all we've got for you today, and I said I've had other AT&T they've been trailing along trying to figure out where Verizon's trying to go, and so hopefully they'll cooperate, or if not, we'll see more applications. So
We are adjourned.